The sky over the Arthrian capital glowed with soft ribbons of light that shifted from silver to blue and back again. From far above, the city looked like a cluster of glowing crystals suspended in the void, stretching endlessly across the plateau. Towers rose like translucent spires, catching and bending the colors of the atmosphere. Every street, every square seemed alive, pulsing with the quiet rhythm of alien life. It was a city that spoke of perfection, of order, of control. To outsiders, it might seem untouchable, impenetrable, and the people who lived there reflected it in every movement, every gesture, every thought. Empress Salira observed the city from the highest terrace of her palace, a structure that rivaled the towers below. The palace was made of light-reflecting material that shimmered as though it were breathing. Its walls seemed alive, flowing with faint colors that changed with her emotions, or so her subjects believed. Salira, the youngest empress in centuries, had learned to master her expressions, her tone, her posture, so that no one could ever predict what she was thinking. She was supreme, clever, and untouchable. Yet today, something unusual stirred in the palace. A message had arrived, carried not by drone nor by the usual royal couriers, but in the old manner, by hand, by someone daring to approach the gates personally. It was a request for an audience with the Empress herself. The messenger, trembling but resolute, had explained that the visitor was a human. Salira's eyes narrowed. Humans were known across multiple star systems as primitive, unpredictable in the wrong way, and above all, unsophisticated. They were a species that survived more by stubbornness and luck than by intelligence, at least according to every report the Empire had received. No human had ever entered the capital willingly, not without coercion, bribes, or threats. And yet here was one, bold enough to request the attention of the Empress herself. She could feel a flicker of curiosity, though she would not admit it even to herself. The palace gates opened to admit the visitor, and her guards, trained for every possible scenario, watched him carefully. Commander Elias Varn walked through the gates as if he were walking into a familiar room. His posture was relaxed, his steps measured, and his eyes, dark and focused, took in everything around him. He did not hesitate, he did not falter, and he did not display the awe that every being in the palace expected. The guards murmured among themselves. Whispers of disbelief spread through the courtyard. He should have faltered, he should have bowed or trembled. He should have shown at least a trace of fear, but he showed none. Salira descended from her terrace to meet him. Her entrance, as always, commanded attention. She wore the flowing garments of her rank, shimmering in the soft lights of the palace. Every step was deliberate, every gesture perfect. But as her eyes fell upon the human, she felt a momentary hesitation she could not explain. He looked small, fragile even, and yet his calm made him seem larger than life. "Commander Elias Varn," she said, her voice a melody of authority and command. "You requested an audience with me. You have it. I come to learn, to understand, and to share what my people have discovered." As they walked, Elias looked around with genuine interest. He studied the walls, the ceiling, the way the light shifted across every surface. He did not speak much, but when he did, it was always insightful, asking questions that revealed his awareness and intelligence. He asked about the energy systems, the methods of governance, the philosophy of the Arthrian culture. His questions were neither naive nor disrespectful. They were precise, informed, and thoughtful. Salira found herself walking beside him, answering, explaining, and observing. Something in the human's way of seeing the world made her feel unsettled, though not in danger. He was not a threat in the usual sense. He did not carry weapons, he did not attempt to deceive, and he did not challenge her authority. And yet every step he took, every question he asked, chipped away at her assumptions about his species. By the time they reached the central chamber, the human had already demonstrated an unexpected awareness of the palace's layout, its systems, and its culture. He had noticed small things, a pattern in the light reflections, a rhythm in the attendants' movements, a logic in the placement of the council chambers that even her advisors had overlooked. Salira leaned back slightly, intrigued despite herself. "You see much," she said. "How do you notice these things?" When everything is unfamiliar, attention becomes our most valuable tool. It was intelligence shaped by necessity, honed by experience, and delivered with confidence. Advisors and courtiers gathered around, murmuring in confusion and admiration. They had expected a chaotic, clumsy human, perhaps begging for mercy or offering trivial knowledge. Instead, they found someone who moved through the court with quiet authority, earning attention not by power but by insight. Salira decided to test him, as any wise ruler would. "You have entered my palace, and you have seen much," she said. "But knowledge alone does not prove wisdom. Let us see if your understanding can match the expectations of this empire." A holographic display unfolded, showing a complex network of interstellar trade routes, population clusters, and energy flows. "These are the arteries of the empire," she said. "Each decision we make here affects countless lives across our territories. If one route fails, one sector falters, and ripple effects extend far beyond comprehension. You may study this, analyze it, or propose any approach. Show me what a human can do. The network is efficient, but it assumes certain behaviors will remain constant. It leaves little room for adaptability. I would suggest adding nodes here, here, and here, not to replace your routes, but to provide alternatives in case of unforeseen events. It would also allow faster exchange of resources and information between sectors that are currently distant from each other." They had assumed a human could not even understand the network, much less propose improvements. "You would restructure my empire?" she asked, her tone calm but edged with curiosity. "I would enhance it," Elias said simply. "Not change it, make it stronger, more resilient. That is all any species can do, use what exists to reach its potential." She had seen many species, many leaders, many strategies. She had never encountered a creature who could enter her palace uninvited, move through her halls unflinching, and speak with such confidence without fear or arrogance. It was refreshing, unsettling, and fascinating all at once. Over the following hours, she continued to observe him. He asked questions about her advisors, about the history of the empire, about the philosophy behind their decisions. His curiosity was relentless but respectful. Where her people often relied on protocol and tradition, he relied on logic, empathy, and observation. He was a mirror to her society that reflected both its strengths and its blind spots. By evening, Solara realized something she had not expected. She had prepared herself to remain distant, to test, to observe, to challenge. Yet with this human, she found herself engaged, eager to hear his thoughts, to watch his process, to see what he would do next. He was not a visitor, he was a teacher in ways she had never imagined. And perhaps most surprising of all, she felt no threat from him. He did not seek conquest. He did not seek glory. He did not seek power. He sought understanding, and in doing so, he had captured her attention in a way that no one else ever had. As the palace lights dimmed, Elias finally looked up from a complex map of the city's energy flows. "Your world is incredible," he said softly. "Every part of it seems alive, connected. I have never seen anything like it. I am honored to learn from it. Or perhaps it is simply what we must do to survive, to thrive, to grow. Sometimes the simplest way forward is the one no one expects." She realized for the first time in her reign that there were mysteries she could not control, questions she could not answer, and brilliance she could not predict. And she liked it. In the stillness of the night, as the city below shimmered and pulsed, Solara understood something that no report, no protocol, and no advisor could ever teach her. A single human had entered her world, and in doing so had changed it in ways she had yet to comprehend. She did not know what would come next. She did not know if this human would succeed, fail, or even survive the challenges ahead. But she did know one thing: her empire, her court, and her understanding of the universe had already shifted. The human had arrived, and the Empress could no longer pretend that everything was predictable, simple, or under her control. And for the first time, she felt alive. The next morning, the palace was unusually quiet. The corridors usually buzzed with attendants and advisors, all moving in perfect synchrony, but today many paused, whispering to each other in low tones. Commander Elias Varn had passed the first test by sheer observation and understanding, and the whispers spoke of disbelief. Not a single human had ever impressed the Arthrians, let alone commanded attention without formal rank or title. Empress Solara observed from her private chamber. She had spent the night replaying every moment of Elias' presence, analyzing his expressions, his speech, his calm confidence. She had expected arrogance, nervousness, or a plea for favor, but he had shown none of these. He had not sought to impress her with power or technology. He had simply understood, learned, and offered insights. She considered her next step carefully. The empire had survived and thrived for centuries by relying on its superiority in knowledge, discipline, and technological mastery. No outsider could have challenged that without risk. Yet here was a human, a creature her advisors called primitive, moving through her halls with curiosity and clarity, and exposing gaps she had never considered. The Empress decided it was time to escalate the challenge. If Elias could understand a city, a network, a system, what else could he do? She summoned him to the council chamber, a vast room with a domed ceiling of shifting light. The council chambers were the heart of decision-making, where laws were debated, strategies planned, and futures determined. Today, it would become the stage for another kind of test. Elias entered the chamber calmly. The holographic displays lit up as he walked in, showing vast networks of planetary trade, interstellar communication lines, and energy flows. Advisors sat around the perimeter, watching him with polite skepticism, expecting him to fail. Solera's voice echoed across the chamber. Commander Varn, you observed a single network yesterday. Today you will observe many. This is not a game. These systems govern millions. Your insights may guide decisions that affect countless lives. Show me the extent of your understanding. His fingers moved through the holograms, tracing paths, pausing to examine connections, questioning patterns with soft hums of thought. He did not rush. He did not panic. He was human, but unlike any human Solera had ever imagined. Your trade lines are efficient, he said after a pause, but they rely heavily on predictable behaviors. If one planet experiences unexpected delays, the network cannot adapt quickly. I suggest adding adaptive nodes that can redistribute resources dynamically. This will prevent bottlenecks and increase resilience. It will also allow faster response to unexpected events without disrupting the entire network. A human cannot know the intricacies of Arthrian systems. Your suggestion is not irrelevant, she said, her tone neutral but carrying weight. Explain why you think these changes will improve the system. Humans have survived by creating flexibility in their plans, by learning from failures quickly, and by adapting in real time. You may have efficiency, order, and technology, but adaptability, true adaptability, is rare. Introducing alternatives strengthens the entire structure, not just isolated parts. She realized that this human was demonstrating not brute force or advanced technology, but something far more subtle, ingenuity. He approached complexity not as a puzzle to dominate, but as a living system to understand, and his solutions reflected that philosophy. Over the course of several hours, Elias continued to analyze networks, suggest improvements, and ask questions. He noticed small details others had ignored. A subtle energy fluctuation in one sector, the timing of shipments that created delays, the way communication signals overlapped to create minor errors. Each observation was simple on its own, but when combined, it formed a picture of insight that none of the council members had anticipated. By midday, even the most skeptical advisors were murmuring quietly to one another, noting that the human might be right. The room, usually rigid with hierarchy and certainty, felt alive with curiosity. Solera herself found it difficult to maintain her usual mask of neutrality. The human had done something unexpected. He had unsettled the council without intending to, simply by understanding and observing. When the council session ended, Solera invited Elias to a private garden within the palace, a place few visitors ever saw. The garden was an oasis of calm, with pools of water reflecting the shifting lights above and trees that seemed to glow faintly in the soft illumination. Here, the Empress could speak freely, without an audience, and perhaps better understand the human before her. "Commander Varn," she said, her voice unusually gentle, "you have navigated our systems with surprising skill. You do not rely on speed or strength or technology alone. You rely on observation, insight, and what exactly? When everything is uncertain, and every choice carries consequences, the only way to survive is to see patterns others overlook, to imagine solutions that are not obvious, and to act when it is needed. That is all humans do." She had studied countless species, taught herself the subtleties of diplomacy, trained herself to predict the behaviors of thousands of intelligent beings, yet this human's explanation felt elegant in its simplicity. She had expected arrogance or flattery or fear. Instead, he offered insight calmly, plainly, and without pretension. "You are not afraid of me," she said quietly, "or my empire, or the council, or the systems that govern billions." She realized she could no longer pretend that she fully understood this human, or what he might do next. She had always prided herself on knowing her empire, on controlling its systems and predicting the behavior of others. Elias had challenged that assumption simply by existing, by observing, and by thinking differently. Later that afternoon, the human was introduced to further aspects of the empire. He met scholars, diplomats, engineers, and philosophers, each curious to see what a human could contribute. He listened attentively, asked questions that revealed understanding beyond mere facts, and offered suggestions that were practical, yet sometimes unconventional. Each time, the Arthrians found themselves rethinking their assumptions. In the observation chamber, he studied star maps and galactic travel routes, noting minor inefficiencies that no alien had considered. He suggested alternative paths that would reduce energy expenditure and increase exploration speed. In the communications hub, he noted patterns in message transmission and suggested methods to reduce confusion between sectors. Every suggestion was simple, elegant, and surprisingly effective. Throughout the day, the Empress followed him quietly, listening to his conversations, watching his interactions. Her curiosity deepened into admiration. She realized that this human strength was not in force or power, but in his ability to see what others missed, to connect patterns, and to think creatively. It was the kind of intelligence that could change entire systems without anyone realizing it until the results were evident. As night approached, the palace halls dimmed with soft lighting, and the city outside shimmered in shades of silver and blue. Salira summoned Elias once more, this time to the private terrace overlooking the capital. They stood in silence, watching the lights ripple across the city, listening to the quiet hum of life. "You see the world differently," she said softly. "Not through power, not through fear, but through understanding. I have never seen this in any species before. Why is it so natural for you?" The human had not only survived the first day in her palace, but he had also revealed flaws, strengths, and possibilities she had never imagined. She could no longer pretend that humans were simple, primitive, or predictable. One had entered her world, and in doing so had changed it. For the first time in her life, she felt a mixture of anticipation and excitement. She did not know what this human would do next, but she felt certain of one thing: the empire, her court, and her understanding of the universe had shifted. The human was no longer just a visitor. He was a challenge, an inspiration, and a reflection of something she had overlooked for too long. As Elias left the terrace, Salira watched him go, feeling a subtle thrill she had never known. The empire was vast, powerful, and structured. Yet one small human with nothing but intelligence, curiosity, and courage had reminded her that even the strongest systems could be enriched, transformed, and humbled by unexpected brilliance. And for the first time, the Empress could not pretend that she had all the answers. The following morning, the palace was alive with anticipation. Word had spread quietly through the corridors that Commander Elias Varn had impressed the Empress herself. Whispers carried through the council chambers and the attendance halls, and every being who could hear could feel a subtle shift in the air. Something unusual was happening. One human, small and unarmed, had entered the heart of the Arthrian Empire and disrupted centuries of expectation, not through strength, not through command, but through curiosity and insight. Empress Salira watched from her private chamber, observing the human as he prepared for the day's activities. She had arranged for him to meet a selection of the Empire's finest minds, from scholars of energy systems to philosophers who debated ethics and governance. The challenge she planned for today would push him further. It would test whether his intelligence and adaptability could extend beyond observation and suggestion into the realm of complex problem-solving. Elias entered the first hall with calm confidence. He carried nothing but a small notebook and a pen, tools of his own design. The scholars had prepared a scenario, a complex puzzle of resource distribution across multiple planetary sectors. The problem was designed to challenge the brightest Arthrian minds, and they expected a human to struggle. Elias did not falter. He walked among the holographic displays, observing, asking questions, and making subtle calculations. Unlike the Arthrians, who often relied on past models and historical data, he allowed his mind to explore possibilities, to imagine outcomes, and to consider variables that had been dismissed as irrelevant. "You are not following protocol," one of the senior scholars whispered. "He will fail. He does not conform to the rules of calculation." Energy flows stabilized, trade lines became more resilient, and planetary sectors that had been vulnerable to delays were now flexible and prepared. Salira observed silently from the edge of the chamber. She had expected cleverness, yes, but not this. Elias' thinking was not mechanical. It was intuitive, creative, and yet precise. He did not simply solve problems. He transformed them, revealing possibilities the Arthrians had never imagined. After the session, she led him to a quiet observation deck overlooking the city. The spires shimmered in the light, reflecting off the calm waters that ran through the capital like silver veins. "You think differently," she said softly. "You do not rely on strength or position or rules. You rely on insight. It unsettles the council, does it not?" Rules were followed, systems were maintained, and deviation was discouraged. And yet here was a human navigating those systems with ease, revealing weaknesses and strengths simultaneously. It was not disrespect. It was understanding. And that understanding unsettled the Empress more than she expected. Later, Elias was introduced to diplomats from allied sectors. These aliens were proud, articulate, and confident in their own intelligence. They had prepared for debate, expecting to outmaneuver a human with logic and strategy. Elias listened carefully, asking questions that exposed gaps in assumptions and highlighting connections they had overlooked. "You think the southern sectors cannot cooperate efficiently?" one diplomat argued. "Our records show them to be independent and unyielding. How can you suggest otherwise? Collaboration is not imposed, it is enabled." Her advisors were struggling to conceal surprise. She herself could not hide the admiration forming within her. Humans, she realized, possessed an intelligence that was both humble and extraordinary. They could see beyond structure, beyond protocol, beyond expectation. And that intelligence was dangerous, not in a destructive way, but in its capacity to change entire systems simply by existing. By midday, the Empress decided to introduce a more subtle challenge. She took Elias to a hall where philosophers debated the ethics of interstellar expansion, resource sharing, and population management. Here, the challenge was not numbers or networks, but ideas. Aliens prided themselves on intellectual superiority, believing their reasoning to be flawless. Elias was human, and humans were known to be unpredictable in their thinking. The debate began. Philosophers spoke in precise language, citing precedent and data, arguing from position and principle. Elias listened, occasionally asking questions that seemed simple but cut to the heart of their assumptions. "Do you consider morality to be absolute or adaptable?" he asked. The philosophers were taken aback. It was not a challenge. They had considered it countless times, but his perspective was different. He asked not to win but to explore. He questioned without judgment, probed without accusation, and highlighted contradictions with clarity. Hours passed. The debate shifted as philosophers found themselves rethinking positions they had long assumed. The human did not dominate or persuade by force. He guided understanding with insight, patience, and reason. By the end of the session, even the most rigid minds acknowledged the value of his perspective. Solera observed quietly, standing slightly apart from the discussion. She realized something profound. The human had not merely survived the day's challenges, but had elevated them. He was not conforming to their expectations. He was expanding them. He was teaching without intending to teach, simply by thinking. When the session ended, she led him to a private terrace that overlooked the palace gardens. The glowing flora shifted in rhythm with the lights above, creating an almost musical harmony of color and reflection. The Empress allowed herself a rare moment of openness. "Commander Varn," she said softly, "you have done more than I expected. You have challenged, improved, and even taught the very people I rely on to govern this empire. Why do you do this? You have nothing to gain, yet you offer insight freely. Knowledge is most valuable when it is shared. Systems, ideas, and people all improve when they are considered carefully and thoughtfully. I am fortunate to witness what I can learn here, and I hope what I share may be useful in return." Yet here was a human, small and unarmed, who wielded intelligence and curiosity in a way that made her question her own methods. He did not seek control or dominance. He sought understanding. The human's presence caused subtle but undeniable ripples in the palace. Advisors whispered about what they had witnessed. Scholars recalculated their models. Diplomats reconsidered alliances. Philosophers revised their debates, and through it all, Elias moved calmly, observing, asking questions, and suggesting solutions. By evening, the palace was quiet again. Elias stood on the terrace with Solera, looking over the city below. "You have changed how I see your empire," he said, almost as a statement to himself. "Not in terms of power, but in terms of potential. So many possibilities are ignored because people assume limits. I do not believe in limits, only opportunities to see more clearly." Elias had proven that understanding, creativity, and courage could move mountains without ever raising a hand. "You are unlike any human I have ever imagined," she said quietly. "You think beyond expectation, act without fear, and change minds without force. That may be your greatest strength. Or perhaps it is simply what humans must do to survive and thrive. We are not the strongest, fastest, or most advanced species, but we are adaptable, curious, and determined. That combination has carried us further than we sometimes realize. One human had entered her world, and in doing so, he had reshaped her understanding of intelligence, influence, and potential. For the first time, Salira felt something unfamiliar, admiration mixed with anticipation. She did not yet know what would happen next, or how far this human could go, but she felt certain of one thing. He had begun a journey that would challenge not just her expectations, but the very foundations of her empire. And she would watch, not as a ruler testing a visitor, but as a witness to brilliance that defied prediction. The following day began with a quiet excitement throughout the palace. Word of Commander Elias Varn's insights had spread even further, reaching the outer wings of the capital where few humans had ever been acknowledged. Scholars whispered in corridors, diplomats paused mid-discussion, and even the guards exchanged knowing glances. The human had already altered the perception of his species, simply by being himself, observant, curious, and fearless. Empress Salira walked through the palace halls with him, leading the way to a chamber reserved for collaboration between the most brilliant minds of the empire. Today, she would test more than his intelligence. She would test his ability to work with the empire itself, to see if human ingenuity could complement alien brilliance rather than merely challenge it. The chamber was enormous, with walls of translucent crystal that displayed flowing holographic projections of planetary sectors, energy grids, transportation lines, and communication networks. The most senior advisors had gathered, each eager to observe the human's next move. Some were skeptical, certain that no human could meaningfully contribute to the Empire's ongoing projects. Others were quietly hopeful, curious to see how he might surprise them again. "You have studied our systems," Salira began, "and you have shown understanding, but knowledge alone is not enough. The strength of any empire lies in its ability to act collectively. Today, you will work with our teams to improve coordination across sectors. Show us not only what you see, but how we might achieve it together." His approach was honest, steady, and thoughtful, the kind of presence that encouraged collaboration rather than intimidation. The first task involved transportation grids connecting distant planets. Energy nodes powered the routes, but inefficiencies had developed over centuries. Ships were delayed, supplies mismanaged, and communication slowed by misaligned schedules. The advisors had assumed humans could not grasp the scale or complexity. Elias surprised them immediately. He walked slowly around the chamber, observing the flows, asking questions of the engineers. He listened attentively, noting subtle patterns in their methods, small redundancies and assumptions that had gone unquestioned for generations. Then he began suggesting adjustments, not in a prescriptive way, but as a guide to help the engineers think differently. "Consider these nodes," he said, pointing to a sector map. "You route energy this way to maintain stability, but if you redistribute slightly during peak periods, you can reduce delays across the entire network. It does not require additional resources, just rethinking priorities and timing." Salira observed silently, feeling a mixture of admiration and awe. The human did not simply provide solutions, he inspired insight. He showed the Arthrians that even their most perfected systems could benefit from adaptability, from creativity, from curiosity. Next, Elias was introduced to a council of diplomats and policymakers. Their task was more subtle, negotiation and coordination among sectors with competing priorities. Humans, they believed, were ill-suited for such matters. They relied on instinct and emotion rather than logic and experience. Elias approached the session with patience and attention. "You assume these sectors will resist change," he said gently. "But resistance is often a result of limited information or lack of flexibility. Provide clear options, demonstrate benefits, and allow them to participate in shaping outcomes. Authority is less important than understanding." By the end of the session, alliances had been strengthened, agreements reached, and conflicts preempted, all without force, pressure, or hierarchy. It was a subtle victory, but profound. The human had shown that diplomacy could be as much about perception and understanding as it was about power or position. Salira smiled faintly. Elias had become more than a visitor. He was now a collaborator, a bridge between human curiosity and Arthrian knowledge. Together, they had the potential to achieve outcomes that neither species could accomplish alone. By mid-afternoon, They moved to the most challenging task yet, innovation. The Empress had gathered her top technologists to work with Elias on a project that could revolutionize planetary energy distribution. It was a test of imagination, ingenuity, and practical application. The Arthrians were brilliant, but their methods were rigid, bound by centuries of tradition. Elias' perspective could disrupt their assumptions and perhaps improve them. He examined the designs, taking note of recurring patterns, redundancies, and areas where energy was wasted. Then he suggested a simple yet elegant alteration that allowed energy to flow more efficiently, using natural planetary cycles to optimize output without additional infrastructure. The technologists were skeptical at first. They had never considered these patterns from a human perspective. But when the simulations ran, the results were undeniable. Efficiency increased dramatically, energy was conserved, and the system could respond to fluctuations autonomously. The human had done what many had considered impossible. He had improved a perfected system, not through brute force or advanced technology, but through observation, reasoning, and creativity. The Empress watched him closely, her mind racing. Humans were not the strongest, fastest, or most technologically advanced species she had encountered. Yet this one human, small, unarmed, and unassuming, had shown her empire insights that many of her advisors could not. His strength lay not in power, but in perspective. It was a reminder that brilliance could be found in unexpected forms. As evening approached, Solera led Elias to the central gardens, a place of calm reflection. Trees with glowing leaves bent toward the pools of water, and soft currents carried gentle luminescence through the air. It was a place of thought, of quiet observation, of subtle inspiration. "You have changed the way many see this empire," she said softly. "Advisors, scholars, diplomats, even I have been affected. You are unlike any human I expected. Why do you approach challenges this way?" Collaboration, creativity, and adaptability. These are what allow humans to thrive, even in situations where we seem at a disadvantage. "Do you not fear failure?" she asked. "Fear does not help understanding," Elias said simply. "We make mistakes, we learn, we adapt. That is the path to improvement." Yet here was a human who demonstrated a different kind of power. The power to observe, to think, to inspire, and to connect. One could not control or command it, but its effect was undeniable. Over the next several hours, Solera and Elias worked together directly. They reviewed energy networks, trade routes, and communication systems. They considered planetary resource management and long-term sustainability. Each discussion revealed insights neither could achieve alone. The human's perspective was complementary, challenging assumptions while offering solutions that were simple, elegant, and effective. As night fell, the palace shimmered under the reflection of stars. Solera and Elias stood together on the terrace overlooking the city, watching lights ripple across the spires and streets. "You have done more than I expected," she said quietly. "You have taught us to think differently, to consider possibilities we had overlooked. You have reminded me that even the greatest systems are not perfect." "We all see what we are willing to see," he said. "Sometimes it takes an outsider or a different perspective to notice what has been hidden in plain sight." She could no longer pretend that humans were limited, predictable, or insignificant. Solera realized that the human had become more than a visitor. He was a partner, a teacher, and a mirror. Through him, she saw new potential for her empire, new opportunities for growth, and a reminder that even the most powerful civilizations could learn from others, if they had the wisdom to listen. Elias finally stood back, observing the city with quiet satisfaction. He had not sought glory, recognition, or authority. He had simply applied the strengths of his species, curiosity, adaptability, and insight. And in doing so, he had earned the respect of an entire empire. Solera, watching him, felt a quiet admiration. She could no longer pretend that she understood everything, or that her empire could not be improved. One human had entered, and the ripple of his presence would extend far beyond what she could yet imagine. The night deepened, the city lights shimmering like a sea of stars. The Empress turned to the human and said, "You have exceeded every expectation I could have imagined. Perhaps the greatest strength of your species is not what we can measure, but what we cannot anticipate." And for the first time, she felt certain that the human's presence would leave a lasting mark, not of dominance, not of conquest, but of inspiration. In the quiet of the palace, surrounded by glowing gardens and sparkling spires, she understood a truth she had never fully realized. Humans could change the world simply by thinking, by learning, and by daring to see differently. and she was grateful to witness it. The days following Elias Varn's arrival passed in a blur of activity, learning, and collaboration. The Empress had allowed him unprecedented access to the Empire's systems, councils, and scholars. Every department he touched seemed to shift subtly under his influence, not because he forced change, but because his presence inspired it. The Arthrians began to see new possibilities, new connections, new ways to improve systems that had been considered perfect for centuries. Today, the Empress had summoned him to the Palace Council for what she described as a final demonstration. It was not a test of strength or knowledge, but of transformation, the culmination of his time within the Empire. Advisors, engineers, diplomats, and scholars crowded into the council chamber, eager to witness the human's contribution one last time. Many whispered to one another. Some were nervous, others were hopeful, all were curious. Solira watched Elias step into the chamber with his usual calm. He carried himself with confidence but not arrogance. His notebook was filled with observations, suggestions, and calculations, but he spoke only when necessary, letting the work speak for itself. The room fell silent as he approached the holographic display that dominated the center of the council chamber. "This," the Empress said, gesturing to the network of planetary grids, trade routes, and communication lines projected in shimmering light, "is the Empire as it exists now. Every system you see has been managed for centuries by our most brilliant minds. Your task is to demonstrate how humans can contribute to shaping the future of our civilization." And where they expected limitations, he found opportunity. "You have done much already," he said softly, "but these systems are only as strong as the people who use them and the perspective they bring. My contribution is not to replace your methods, but to introduce flexibility, creativity, and the ability to adapt when the unexpected occurs." Energy grids could be slightly adjusted to allow natural planetary cycles to optimize output. Trade routes could shift dynamically, responding to shortages or surpluses in real time. Communication channels could use redundancy to prevent delays and reduce errors without overwhelming the network. These were subtle changes, yet their impact was profound. The advisors murmured in disbelief as simulations ran. Each adjustment, small on its own, combined to create a network that was stronger, more resilient, and more efficient than anything the Arthrians had achieved alone. Problems that had seemed permanent for centuries were now solvable with minimal effort. Solira felt a surge of admiration. The human had not only understood the Empire, but had improved it in ways she had not imagined possible. His methods were simple, logical, and elegant, but what made them extraordinary was that they were born of a perspective no Arthrian had considered: human adaptability and creativity. Next, Elias turned to the diplomats and policymakers. He outlined approaches for improving interplanetary collaboration, emphasizing communication, shared understanding, and empathy. He suggested methods for resolving disputes not by command, but by negotiation, listening, and mutual benefit. Each suggestion was tested in simulation, and each resulted in better outcomes than any prior strategy. The chamber was filled with quiet astonishment. Some advisors shook their heads, unable to believe the results. Others scribbled notes furiously, eager to learn from this unprecedented approach. Even the senior diplomats admitted that the human had revealed possibilities they had never considered. Finally, the Empress led him to the scholars and philosophers who had debated ethics, strategy, and governance. Elias proposed a framework for decision-making that combined logic, creativity, and adaptability. It allowed leaders to anticipate challenges, consider multiple outcomes, and act with both reason and intuition. The philosophers, initially skeptical, found themselves nodding in agreement. They had expected rigidity, dogma, and limits. Instead, they discovered insight, flexibility, and opportunity. Solira observed quietly, realizing the full extent of what had occurred. Elias had done more than improve systems. He had transformed perspectives, altered assumptions, and inspired collaboration across the Empire. The human had shown that power was not always about dominance, control, or technology, but about vision, understanding, and the courage to see differently. As the sun set, painting the crystal spires of the capital in shades of gold and violet, the Empress and the human retreated to the palace gardens. The glowing flora and shimmering pools reflected the twilight, creating a serene and contemplative atmosphere. Solira allowed herself a rare moment of openness. "You have changed this empire," she said softly. "Not through force, not through authority, but through understanding and insight. You have reminded us that even the greatest civilizations have room to grow. I only offer a different perspective, one that may allow the potential you already possess to shine more fully. But Elias had demonstrated something else. That intelligence paired with curiosity, courage, and creativity could achieve outcomes that authority alone could never accomplish. You have shown me something important, she said quietly. Humans are not merely resilient, they are capable of shaping the world around them in ways that others cannot predict. Your species has a gift that is rare, perhaps unique. The ability to think beyond expectation, to challenge limits without force, and to inspire change through insight alone. That combination has carried us further than we often realize. Over the next several days, the changes Elias had introduced were implemented across the empire. Energy networks stabilized, trade routes optimized, and communication systems improved. Collaboration between sectors increased, and conflicts that had persisted for generations were resolved through dialogue and understanding. The human's influence was subtle but unmistakable, and it left an indelible mark on every aspect of the empire. Advisors who had once doubted him now spoke of his methods with respect. Diplomats and scholars sought his perspective, eager to learn from the insights he had shared. And the Empress, once untouchable and unflinching, found herself inspired by his approach, reconsidering how she led and how she thought. Finally, a ceremony was held in the central hall of the palace to honor the achievements of collaboration. The Empress stood before her council and the gathered citizens of the capital, and she spoke openly about the human who had entered their lives and transformed their understanding of intelligence, innovation, and cooperation. Commander Elias Varn has shown us that true strength lies not only in power or technology, she said, her voice carrying across the hall, but in curiosity, insight, and the courage to think differently. He has reminded us that every civilization, no matter how advanced, can grow stronger by embracing new perspectives. Humans had been outsiders for centuries, considered limited, unpredictable, and fragile. Yet one human had entered the heart of the empire and left a legacy of understanding and inspiration that would endure for generations. Elias stepped forward, humbly acknowledging the Empress's praise. "I have done nothing alone," he said. "This empire's people are brilliant, creative, and capable. I have only contributed what humans do best: observation, insight, and adaptability. The true achievement belongs to all of you." Elias had demonstrated the extraordinary potential of his species, not through force, conquest, or domination, but through thought, observation, and cooperation. As the ceremony concluded, Salira led him to the terrace overlooking the city. The lights shimmered in the night, reflecting off the crystal spires and flowing water, a testament to the empire's enduring brilliance. "You have changed this world," she said softly. "I do not know how many humans could have achieved what you did, perhaps none. But you have reminded us all that true strength is often found in the most unexpected places. To learn from what is around us and improve it, not destroy it. That is all we have ever sought to do." In the days that followed, the changes Elias inspired continued to take root. Systems became more resilient, collaborations more meaningful, and the culture of the empire shifted subtly toward curiosity, adaptability, and openness. The human had left a mark that would endure long after he returned to his own world. And when he finally departed, returning to Earth, the Empress stood at the palace terrace and watched him leave. She could no longer pretend she fully understood humans. She could not predict what they might do next or how far their ingenuity could reach. But she knew this: humans were extraordinary. They could challenge assumptions, inspire greatness, and transform even the mightiest of empires without ever raising a hand. And she felt grateful, no, privileged, to have witnessed it firsthand. The human had entered, and in doing so, he had changed everything.